Hey everybody, a couple months ago, I was at a Christmas party. Some nice lady walks up to me and says, "Hey, you like jet skis, huh?" I'm like, "Yeah, I like jet skis." She's like, "Well, you need to come get this jet ski out of my yard." I'm like, "Oh, okay. How much would you charge me?" I'm like, "Well, I'll not charge you anything. If there's got to be something or something, I'm sure I'll figure out something to do with it. Make it, get it to the right home or whatever." She's like, "Okay, come get it." So we'll go check it out and see what it's all about. Here's what we found here. It's looks like an old TS. Looks like it hasn't been registered since 2013. We got some flat tires going on here. And otherwise, looks like it's in pretty good shape. It is actually a jet ski, so you can definitely do something with it here. Yep, that'll work. All right, just like that, I guess, huh? Looks like we're building us a TS. All right. We're back at the shop. The tires look a little worse for wear. They're still flat. But overall, this thing's in pretty good shape. When I was leaving, the lady came out and grabbed me, and she actually had the paperwork for it. So that changes the dynamics of this a little bit. We may actually fix this and get it running and do something with it, because it is a nice ski. It's in very good shape. It's just been sitting for several years. I went ahead and cut the lock here, and I'm hoping, yeah, it looks like we can get it off of there. Yeah, there we go. Into the trash it goes. And then let's see what we got in here. Hasn't been opened in over 10 years. Looks like there's a, oops. Looks like there's brand new life jackets in the bag here that have turned to powder. Let's hey, and it matches the ski. That's cool. That's kind of cool. Oh, it's an actual Kawasaki. So today we're back on our Tandem Sport, our TS 650, and we're just gonna go ahead and get started. First thing we're gonna do is something's really bothering me. These trim pieces here. As you can see, they fall off, and they don't last. They weren't made to last 30 years, so we're gonna go ahead and, because this is stuff that ends up getting in your pump or getting caught on somebody and hurting someone, so we don't save these. Okay. Let's see here. We'll work on that a little later, probably, because that's not done. But for now, our goal is, this ski's been sitting for at least 13 years. So we're gonna go through the basics, make sure it's gonna run before we take it apart. That way, if there's anything we need to address, we'll do that then. Okay. This thing is very, very clean. Hey, this has the grenade pin, and it looks like it's never been pulled. Looks like it got bumped with the seat. So we're gonna get to discuss that, which is very positive too. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a function check on all this stuff. Make sure, because we're taking it apart, we don't want to assume it runs and then we get it all back together and we don't have spark or we don't have compression. And we want to make sure we have all this stuff, even though the ski looks incredible and at very low hours. We do not assume. So we're going to do, and it looks like the oil injection was still intact. I haven't decided whether or not to remove the oil injection at this point. And although it's always a wise decision to do that, to bypass it. Now, okay, it turns over, that's positive. Sounds like it has good compression. That's positive as well. These skis have a safety lanyard that shuts off spark when you fall off, so we're going to make sure that's bypassed. So we'll figure out if we have spark first. We have good, strong spark. Come back here and admire the 17-year-old salt water that's been sitting in here rotting everything for the last many, many years. So we need to make sure that's pointed somewhere non-harmful when we go to start this thing. But that was kind of interesting. Looks like we lost a spark plug cap up in here. That's going to give us some spark issues. That may have been why this thing stopped being ridden. It probably developed a solid miss, and they were worried the motor was hurt. But we'll check. We'll do further investigation on that. The spark plugs are loose. That's probably a bad sign too. But that's okay. We'll check it all out. Spark plugs look like they're burning clean. $152, that's awesome. That's as good as new, so it is a low hour motor. As long as this one matches. $155. So we're within 5 PSI. I'm okay with that. As dry as the motor is, that could be solved when we add oil to it, when we get it running. It'll even out. That small of a difference. The motor's not hurt. It's in good shape. That's positive. So we have compression. We have spark. We'll look at the fuel system later once we get the engine out. And we'll probably go ahead and remove the oil injection. Like I said, I still haven't 100% committed to that yet. Gauging on what shape this thing is in, the oil injection could probably work for some time in the future. But that's always going to be a failure point. And on these oil injections, they're 1-to-1, which means the engine's at 5,000 RPM, the oil pump's at 5,000 RPM, so they tend to fail. That's why the Sea-Doos actually have a better oil injection system, because they gear reduce it. So the engine's at 5,000 to 7,000 RPM, the oil injection's only at 1,500 to 2,000. So that's why those are better setups. So we'll probably end up removing this. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead and start pulling her apart. We're back on the engine again. We got the engine out, obviously. I went ahead and put this back together. I wanted to put the grenade pin back together to show you guys. This pin here is a very interesting piece of deal here. What this does is this is a cable. If you notice, there's no gap here. From the factory, there was a 1/4 inch gap there. That's why if you pull this, this is a bad deal. I'm going to show you what this is. I'm not going to pull it quite yet, but I'm going to flip the motor over and show you what this is, okay? My hand is on the cable right now. So what this is, the very bottom of the motor, inside the engine where the crankshaft is, when you sink the jet ski, the engine fills up with water. There's no way to get that water out without turning the engine up, turning the whole ski upside down and clearing the water. It takes a lot of time. If you pull this pin, see this here? I don't know if you can see this working here. See that? When you pull this pin, it opens this plunger, and there's a reed assembly in here. It lets all the water run out of the motor, okay? So you pull it, the water all drains out of the motor, and you let it off, and that suction cup is supposed to seal again. Problem is, it doesn't seal, because over the years, this has been vacuumed into that hole, okay? That's vacuumed down in there. When you pull it and pull the plunger back out, it expands, and it doesn't reseat. Now, this becomes a place for air to go into the engine. It leans out and blows. Now, when we take this engine apart here in a little bit, we're going to bypass that. We're not going to use a block-off plate, even though that's what everybody wants to sell you. So we're going to deal with all that as we take the engine apart. I wanted to show you what this is so that when we disassemble it and remove it, throw it in the trash, you'll understand the process we're doing from that point. So in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and pull this motor back apart. And while I was reassembling this, I determined that this manifold needs to be time started. And no, we don't use helicoils. I don't use helicoils on exhaust or head because the amount of torque that's required is stronger than you'll end up tearing a helicoil back out. And they don't withstand the abuse that a time start does. So not only are the bolts bad, but you can see the holes are no good either. So those were galled from the factory. Those were either over torqued or they didn't use a Loctite on them. But something happened because this is the first time they've ever been apart. I'm pretty comfortable in that theory. Our goal is going to be to replace the crank seals. We never trust crank seals. I would recommend using OEM Kawasaki crank seals because they've been known to last 15, 20 years. I use aftermarket because it's not a big deal for me to go back in here and rebuild this. But I do strongly suggest OEM. Okay, so here's that crankcase drain we were just looking at. We're going to take these bolts out, and the whole assembly is going to come off, or not, in theory. Okay, see, there's just O-rings here, and you can buy a blanking plate that just bolts right back on here. But you're trusting these O-rings again, and they will leak. I've seen them leak, so we're going to deal with this a different way. You can see these holes go straight into the crankcase. So that, and when we take the engine apart, you'll see that. And also, see this here? This trace here, that's evidence that the crank seal was leaking. And this is one of the reasons, this was leaking before they even stopped running it. So this is why I say you always want to replace your crank seals. That's always a good idea. And then right here is the oil pump for the oil injection. And as you can see, it's direct driven off the front of the crankshaft. This is what I was referring to when it spins as fast as the engine. That's why these will always fail. They're just overworked. Yamaha does the same thing. Sea-Doo is the only company I'm aware of that does the gear reduction on those. And that's why if anybody who saw the Missouri River run, we took Sea-Doos, right? We utilized the oil injection from 1992, and every ski finished with their oil injection intact. And that just totally fascinates me. So this is the front engine cover. This accesses the flywheel. Okay, look at that, all brand new. There's a spring in there. That spring must have been introduced in 91. And this washer here is on all of them. All the way back to 86 has this washer, but they didn't have this spring until 91. So this is obviously a 91. And the other reason I know that is because it's got the larger carburetor. So then this O-ring here, we want to save. These don't usually go bad. As long as they've not been stretched out, they're reusable. Yeah, it's good there. So that all looks good. I don't see any evidence of anything wrong here. We'll look at this Bendix here, but the Bendix feels good. The spring's in there. The weights are there. We'll look at that closer when we get this removed. Now we'll pull the flywheel and we'll pull the coupler. It's important on these flywheel puller bolts. You don't want to drive them in too far because you will stick them right into the stator. And we do not want that. The stator is one of the most expensive parts on the ski. However, I just found out that SBT, company out of Florida, they make replacement engines and a lot of other stuff over the years. I just got an email from them yesterday and saying they're making stators for these now, and they're very reasonably priced. So last time these stators were available from Kawasaki, they were like $400. So I believe SBTs are like 250 bucks. And I really like SBT's quality control. They tend to build, how do I say it? They tend to sell stuff that's as good as OEM or one of the better aftermarket companies anyway. So I haven't had a chance to personally test one. I'm sure I will in the coming months because I always need stators probably once a year for some ski or another. It's also critical that you have these parallel. You don't want your puller at an angle because that'll damage something. And if it doesn't come off right away, we always have to apply heat. But we'll see how it happens. Maybe not. Yeah, this thing's never been apart. Someone's not been in there and over-tighten the flywheel, so. Well, I am a hoarder. And it's obvious I'm a hoarder because I have a TS fuel pickup in my inventory. And I've had this probably for 10 or 15 years and just moved it around several times. And it looks like I've, by cutting the fuel line here that goes up to the fuel switch, I wasn't thinking when I cut it, but it's so hard and brittle that it can't stretch over this new thing. So, well, we can use the return no problem because it's still stretched out nicely. It'll zip tie on there rather well. We can't use this fuel line, so we're going to cut it off and do something different with it. Look at it, I made it. See it poking through there? That doesn't get any closer than that. There might have been a little more luck involved than skill on that one. All right. Okay, so we got this little guy here. We got our breather. We got our, well, this here is our rubber O-ring. It feels like a steel washer. There's no give to it at all. Now this is our vent here. Okay, the vent is connected. This is our return, which will be this one here. Okay, and then this will be our on. Okay. Boy, that's that is okay. No, that's not good either. Okay. We'll make sure we zip that one tight. We don't want to have any problems with that. Okay, now we have our fuel line done. Okay. Fuel is good. That's the fuel. This is the return. Okay, that's the choke cable. Throttle cable's attached there. Because this was a previously used TS deal, there's an on and a reserve. Remember the two straws, one's longer? The on is already sealed. So this one here we're going to leave alone. It's already sealed. It's not open anymore. It's already been blocked off. So for those of you who are paying attention, that's already been done. So that's why you didn't see me do it. So this carburetor here, this is the fuel pump side. If you can hear that, it works perfectly. This goes back to our theory that this low hour ski, it was stored properly. I don't know how, but evidently it was stored properly. And all we got to do is we got to inspect the carburetor, make sure it does everything it's supposed to do. The fuel pump's working properly. We're going to rejet because we've taken the fuel and the oil injection off, and now we're going to be adding oil to the fuel. So whatever thickness the fuel was before, now it's 10 times thicker because we've added oil. And when you add oil like that, you have the jet size in the carburetor hasn't changed. So if you're trying to put the same amount of fuel into the engine, you're not going to be able to because the hole is now too small. So you have to rejet. And for some reason, this was very common knowledge in the 80s and 90s. Everybody knew this was elementary. Somewhere along the line it got lost, and they never included the jets that you needed when you bought a oil injection block-off kit. It didn't come with your pilot jet that you needed to rejet your carb. And I always found that criminal. So you can hear this. That's crunchy and that's hard as a rock. We need this to flow better, so we're going to replace this. So now if we look, this little guy here is the pilot jet for your low speed transition, just off of idle basically. And this is your main jet. This is for high speed, full throttle. And then this here's your transition. That was stuck closed, I just popped it. But this here's your pop off. That all feels pretty good. So we're going to pull this pilot jet and we're going to go 3 sizes bigger. Most of these carburetors usually have a 72 pilot. This one has a 65. So because I've done so many of these, I usually carry the 82 size pilots in stock. So that's what this one is getting, because I'm pretty comfortable with our atmospherics out here that the 82 will work. So I don't want to set this down because I don't want it to get dirty. So this screw here, this lifts the entire jet plate here. This is important as well. I should probably show you guys this. So on a Mikuni carburetor, you have a needle and seat, and the seat's replaceable. That's all look good. This is where this carburetor traps all of its dirt and debris is down in this hole. So see how that sits on there? This entire jet plate is what's the needle and seat. Okay, this has the jet plate. This entire jet plate is the needle and seat, is the seat, and it says 2. That's the size is a 2. Because it's oil injected, this is a smaller one. The bigger ones are 2.3 and 2.5, I believe. And I'm not even sure if you can still get these from Kia in North America or not. But that's what the Sudco 42s came with, a 2.5 jet plate, because they were made to flow premix with oil already. So this is where we put a bigger pilot jet in here, and that gives us more fuel all the way through the range. So this is a good starting point. We will jet accordingly. There we go. Perfect. You see how easily that tore? This is turned to powder. These always turn to powder. And yes, I recommend using Kian only. And a lot of people are going to be upset I'm not rebuilding the whole carb. But I usually replace these 3 or 4 times. I'll put this back together. We got our lineup pins there. This gasket's important on here. Notice I didn't pull this off. This actually sets a depth. It doesn't really watertight anything or fuel tight, because this is its breather hole here. So as this moves, it can get air. So we're gonna put that back together. I'm not going to fold these tabs over yet. These tabs are for safety, so the bolts don't back out. I'm not going to do that yet until we're comfortable with the jetting and everything's solid and running. This is calcium separating out of the water. So we want to dump that out as much as possible, which shows that it has run on this lake. Interestingly enough. Okay, that's the visibility. I was able to save the other 2 bolts by running them through a die and getting the aluminum galling off. And it was welded on there pretty good, so it was a good choice to abandon that manifold. And we're not going to over torque them as to do that again. We're going to make sure they're tight though and even. There we go. Okay, I didn't let it start on purpose. I had the choke on, I flooded it. I don't want to blow this stuff all over the lathe here, so We're going to spin this. This. Okay, ready? Leave that stinky stuff out there. All right, so if you noticed, after revving it violently, right? When I let off the throttle and I let it idle, it didn't idle. Usually after a second, it idles down and runs out of fuel. That's a very, very common issue when oil injection has been removed and you don't rejet. That's the most common tell. Whenever I hear, oh, the thing, if I let off the idle, it idles down and shuts off, it runs out of fuel, I have to choke it. That's the pilot jet not being changed during oil injection removal. That size, I always use an 82 on the 38 carb, it always works. I worried it might be a little rich because the 65 was in the stock position, usually they're 72. But anyway, it worked. All I have left to do is loop this water line here from the head to the exhaust. I'm not going to put that whole assembly that was back in there with the flush and everything. I'm just going to run a straight tube over and be done with it. And then we'll be ready to water test. I was putting this thing together, getting it ready for our ride tomorrow, and I almost skipped over something very important, so I thought I'd share that with you guys. You saw these things that had the pin stuck in it. I went ahead and replaced it with one from another spark plug because I realized these have resistors in them and we don't want to use them anyway. So I'm doing is I'm cutting this back and I'm checking the cord, making sure the wire doesn't pull out. If the wire pulls out, spark plug wires are bad. So these are good. These spark plug caps have resistors in them and those are no good. Even though they're from the factory, they were put there from the factory after the FCC passed some laws on incidental radiators. And that's non-intentional radio transmission, blah, blah, blah. You can Google that to your heart's content. We'll talk about that more on the 650 because we'll be discussing rev limiters because the first thing you're going to do is make more power with your ski. And you can't do that with these stock ignitions. So we're going to go through that stuff too at some point. For right now, we're just going to put some good old-fashioned crimp on ends here. And we are going to go get ready to hit the water. Yeah, so Yamaha went the other way with that legislation. And until the day they stopped producing the Superjet in 2020, 30 years later, they still did not have resistor caps on their wires. You know, even the 2020 Superjet still did not have that. So I think we're safe in running these. It's a different interpretation of the law. I'm not saying one's better than the other or worse than the other. It's just, all right, we're ready for tomorrow's test drive, guys. Perfect. Now we have non-resistor caps. I'm gonna throw these in the trash. Missed again. Okay, guys, here we are at Body Beach. We're gonna test this thing. I've already started up, make sure it runs on the trailer. It does smoke a lot, but that's because we removed the oil injection. But we're gonna go ahead and give her a shot here and see how she does under power. Alright, well, there you have it. Let's see here. .2 mile an hour. That's respectable for this big old heavy thing. So here we go. What we'll do with it next, I'm not really sure. Finished up the TS, down at the lake, tested it. As you know, we had audio problems, so the important things you probably missed in this video was the grenade pin, the case drain, but and the fuel issues, the fuel selector, because these fuel selectors weren't designed for ethanol fuels. So we take them out, you know, the ethanol gets in there and swells, the O-ring's closed, and then that slows down the flow of fuel, starves the engine for fuel, we take them out. The other thing was the crankcase drain and the crankshaft seals, replacing those. But fear not, we're doing a 650 stand-up here in a couple weeks. That the motor, we're doing the same exact thing. So we will cover that again with the 650 stand-up. Same exact motor, same exact issues. So this was pretty much a preservation, restoration. We didn't really do anything deep with it. It had already ran. We knew it ran. If you noticed, obviously you noticed it was smoky out there on the water. The difference between oil injection and not having oil injection is there's the same amount of oil in the fuel at all times. With oil injection, the oil injection revs with the motor. So when the motor's idling, there's not a lot of oil. It doesn't matter what the fuel's doing. There's a certain amount of oil per RPM. When you put oil in the fuel, it all mixes together. So when the ski's not running the best, you're still getting the same amount of oil, so it's going to smoke more. Obviously, we're not in April, it's July, and it's over 120 something degrees. And
Celsius, altimeter 2966, mark, density altitude 4,700.
4,700. We're normally at 600 feet. So that's like trying to drive this thing in Denver, right? So obviously the air's gone away, but the idea is it still ran, it still made power, it did everything it was supposed to do. It was just a little richer than we like. But I'm not going to chase that because we want these skis to run in December, January when it's 32 degrees and the water's cold versus right now when it's 120 something and the density altitude runs away from us. So it does everything it's supposed to do. I'm really happy with it. And again, like I said, we're doing a 650 stand-up next, so stay tuned and thanks for watching.